The war had lasted for 7 cycles of the Great Sun, and Commander Vexnar of the Dralian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the burning world below. The humans had fought harder than any species the Empire had ever faced. They had lost 3 fleets to these strange creatures, and still they refused to surrender. Vexnar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the latest reports. The human colony on Kepler 442b was falling. His ground forces had broken through their defensive lines, and now the Imperial soldiers were sweeping through the civilian zones. It should have been a moment of triumph, but something in the reports troubled him. "Admiral," said his communications officer, a young Dralian named Crixel, "we are receiving strange reports from the surface." "What kind of reports?" Vexnar asked, his voice low and rumbling. "The humans are protecting our orphaned young, sir." Vexnar turned all 4 eyes toward Crixel. "Explain." "During the battle for the northern settlement, our forces destroyed a refugee camp. There were Dralian children there, sir, war orphans from the Vega offensive. The humans had been caring for them." Vexnar felt something cold move through his chest. The Vega offensive had been his greatest victory. He had destroyed an entire human fleet and captured 3 of their colony worlds. But in the chaos, many Dralian families had been separated. Children had been lost. "And now," Vexnar asked. "The human soldiers are fighting to protect them, sir. They are treating our young as if they were their own offspring." On the surface of Kepler 442b, Sergeant Maria Santos crouched behind a burned-out transport vehicle, her rifle pressed against her shoulder. Around her, the remnants of her squad held defensive positions. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were not going to move. Behind them, in the basement of a collapsed building, were 47 Dralian children. The youngest was barely old enough to walk on its 4 legs. The oldest was perhaps 12 cycles old by Dralian counting. They were all terrified, all alone, and all dependent on the humans who had found them wandering in the aftermath of battle. "Sergeant," said Private Chen, his voice crackling over the radio, "I count 30+ hostiles approaching from the east. They'll be on us in 5 minutes." "Hold your fire until they're within range," Maria ordered. "And remember, we're not trying to kill them all. We just need to buy time for the evacuation." "Sergeant, respectfully, what evacuation? Our ships are gone. There's nowhere to evacuate to." Maria knew Chen was right. The last human transport had left orbit 2 days ago, and it wasn't coming back. They were stranded on a dying world, fighting a war they had already lost. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the 47 small creatures huddled in the darkness below, waiting for someone to save them. "Then we hold until we can't hold anymore," she said simply. The Dralian assault team moved through the rubble with practiced efficiency. Their leader, a veteran warrior named Thraxel, had fought humans many times. He knew how dangerous they could be, how unpredictable. But this time something was different. The humans were not trying to escape. They were not trying to break through to friendly lines. They were simply holding. "What are they protecting?" one of his soldiers asked. Thraxel raised his scanner and pointed it at the building behind the human position. What he saw made all 4 of his heart stop. "Children," he said, "Dralian children." His soldiers looked at him with confusion. "That's impossible. What would humans want with our young?" "I don't know," Thraxel admitted, "but I intend to find out. All units hold fire." Maria watched through her scope as the Dralian soldiers stopped their advance. They were well within weapons range now, but they weren't shooting. One of them, larger than the others and wearing officer's markings, stepped forward with his arms raised. "He wants to talk," Chen said, surprise evident in his voice. "Cover me," Maria said, and before anyone could protest, she was moving out from behind cover. She walked toward the Dralian officer with her rifle lowered but ready. They met in the middle of the destroyed street, surrounded by the debris of war. Up close, the Dralian was even more imposing. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. But his eyes, all 4 of them, held something she hadn't expected to see: confusion. "Why?" the Dralian asked. His voice was deep and rough, but his command of human language was surprisingly good. "Why what? Why are you protecting our children? They are the offspring of your enemy. You could use them as hostages. You could kill them. Why do you fight and die to keep them safe?" Maria looked at this alien creature, this being from a species that had killed millions of her people, and she felt nothing but pity. "Because they're children," she said. "They didn't choose this war. They didn't kill anyone. They're just scared kids who want to go home, and as long as I'm breathing, no one is going to hurt them, not even you." Thraxel stared at the human female. She was so small compared to him, so fragile. He could kill her with a single blow from any of his 4 arms, but she stood before him without fear, her eyes hard and determined. "You would die for the children of your enemy." "I would die for any child," Maria said. "That's what humans do. We protect the innocent. It doesn't matter what species they are." Thraxel was quiet for a long moment. In all his years of warfare, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans were fierce warriors, everyone knew that. They fought with a ferocity that few species could match. But this was something else entirely. "I have fought many battles," he said finally. "I have killed many enemies, but I have never met a warrior who would die to protect the children of those enemies. I do not understand you, human." "You don't have to understand me," Maria said. "You just have to let us get those kids somewhere safe." "And where would that be? Your colony is falling, your fleet is gone, you have nowhere to go." Maria's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make somewhere. We'll keep them safe in that basement until the war is over if we have to. But we're not leaving them, and we're not letting anyone hurt them." Thraxel made a decision. It went against everything he had been trained to do, everything he believed about war and enemies. But something in the human's eyes told him that she was telling the truth. She would die for those children. Her entire squad would die for them. "What are your terms?" he asked. Maria blinked in surprise. "My terms? You want to protect the children. I want to return them to their families. Perhaps we can help each other." In the basement below, a young Dralian named Sixa huddled with the other children. She was only 8 cycles old, but she had already seen more horror than most adults ever would. Her parents had been killed in the first wave of attacks. She had wandered alone for days before the humans found her. She remembered being terrified of them at first. They looked so strange, with only 2 arms and 2 eyes and that soft, vulnerable skin. But then one of them, a female with kind eyes and gentle hands, had knelt down in front of her and smiled. "Don't be scared," the human had said. "We're going to take care of you." And they had. For weeks, the humans had fed her and the other children. They had given them blankets and medicine and toys. They had sung songs to them in their strange, musical language. They had held them when they cried and told them stories when they couldn't sleep. Sixa didn't understand why. Her elders had always told her that aliens were dangerous, that other species couldn't be trusted. But these humans had shown her nothing but kindness. They had treated her like she was one of their own offspring. Now, as she listened to the sounds of battle above, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The humans would protect them. She was sure of it. The negotiations between Maria and Thraxel lasted for 3 hours. They talked about the children, about the war, about their respective peoples. Thraxel learned that the humans had been caring for Dralian orphans since the beginning of the conflict. Whenever they found lost or abandoned children, they took them in, regardless of species. "We have a saying," Maria explained. "It takes a village to raise a child. It doesn't specify what kind of child." "Your species is very strange," Thraxel said. "I know, we're also very stubborn." By the end of the conversation, they had reached an agreement. Thraxel would arrange safe passage for the children to Dralian territory. In exchange, Maria and her squad would be treated as prisoners of war rather than executed as spies. "You understand that I cannot guarantee your safety," Thraxel warned. "My superiors may have other plans." "I understand, but the children will be safe. They will be returned to their families or placed in orphanage facilities. I give you my word." Maria nodded. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than anything she had hoped for. The children would survive. That was all that mattered. As she walked back to her squad to deliver the news, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had no idea what would happen to her and her soldiers. They might be imprisoned for years. They might be tortured for information. They might be killed. But the 47 children in that basement would live. They would grow up and have lives and families of their own. And that was worth dying for. Commander Vexnar received Thraxel's report with a mixture of confusion and fascination. He had expected a straightforward battle. Instead, he had discovered something that challenged everything he thought he knew about humans. "They really were protecting our children?" he asked. "Yes, Commander. Without any expectation of reward or rescue, they were prepared to die for them." Vexnar sat in silence for a long moment. The war had been going on for so long that he had almost forgotten there was anything other than death and destruction. He had come to see the humans as nothing more than enemies to be conquered. But this changed things. "Bring the human soldiers to my ship," he ordered, "and handle them gently. I want to speak with them personally." "Yes, Commander." As Thraxel's image faded from the screen, Vexnar turned to look out the window at the burning world below. For the first time in 7 cycles, he found himself wondering if perhaps this war had gone on long enough. Perhaps it was time for something new. The transport ship that carried Maria and her squad to the Dralian flagship was surprisingly comfortable. They were given food and water and medical attention for their wounds. The guards who watched over them were firm but not cruel. Maria sat in her cell, thinking about everything that had happened. She had joined the military to protect people. She had never imagined that would mean protecting the children of her enemies. But somehow, it felt right. It felt like the most human thing she had ever done. A door opened and a Dralian guard appeared. "Sergeant Santos, Commander Vexnar wishes to see you." Maria stood up and straightened her uniform as best she could. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting. The Dralian commander was legendary among human forces, known for his tactical brilliance and his ruthlessness. But as she followed the guard through the corridors of the massive ship, she felt no fear. Whatever happened next, she had done the right thing, and no one could take that away from her. The children were safe. That was all that mattered. The Dralian flagship was enormous, a city floating in the void of space. Maria followed her guard through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past crew members who stopped and stared at her with their multiple eyes. She was probably the first human many of them had ever seen up close. Commander Vexnar's quarters were located at the heart of the ship, behind multiple security checkpoints. When Maria finally entered, she found herself in a room that was surprisingly elegant. Paintings of alien landscapes hung on the walls. Strange plants grew in illuminated containers, and at the center of it all, seated behind a massive desk, was the commander himself. He was old for a Dralian, Maria could tell. His gray skin had faded to a dull silver, and his movements were slow and deliberate. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being examined under a microscope. "Sergeant Maria Santos," Vexnar said. His voice was like distant thunder. "Please sit." Maria sat in the chair provided. It was clearly designed for Dralian bodies, not human ones, but she managed to make herself comfortable. "I have read the reports," Vexnar continued. "I have spoken with Officer Thraxel. I have reviewed the recordings from the battlefield, and I must confess I am confused." "About what, sir?" "About you, about your species, about everything I thought I knew about this war. Vexnar stood and walked to a window that looked out into space, his four hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that looked surprisingly human. "When this war began," he said, "I believed I understood humans. You were aggressive, expansionist, dangerous. You had to be contained before you threatened the entire galaxy. That was the official position of the Empire, and I believed it completely." "And now?" Maria asked. "Now I am not so sure." He turned to face her. "Tell me, Sergeant, why did you save those children? And I want the truth, not propaganda, not noble speeches. The truth." Maria was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. This Dralian commander had killed countless humans. He had destroyed colonies and fleets. He was, by any measure, an enemy of everything she had sworn to protect. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine curiosity that demanded honesty. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Because when I looked at those kids, I didn't see aliens. I saw children, scared, hungry, alone, and I couldn't leave them like that. I couldn't walk past them and pretend they weren't there. Even though they were Dralian, even though their parents might have killed humans. Even then, kids aren't responsible for what their parents do. They're just kids. They deserve a chance to grow up and become whoever they're going to become. And maybe, if we show them kindness now, they'll remember it later. Maybe they'll grow up thinking that humans aren't so bad after all. Maybe that's how we end this war, one kid at a time." Vexnar was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a strange sound, deep and rumbling, unlike anything Maria had ever heard. "One kid at a time," he repeated. "You humans are remarkable creatures. In 7 cycles of war, you have never stopped surprising me. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet, but I suspect it might be." He returned to his desk and sat down heavily. "I have been fighting this war for so long that I have forgotten there could be any other way. We Dralians are a proud people. We do not forget slights or insults. When your species first expanded into our space, we saw it as an act of aggression. And so we responded with aggression of our own." "We didn't know that space was claimed," Maria said. "Our probes didn't detect any settlements. Because we had not settled those worlds yet. We were simply reserving them for future generations. But your ships arrived and began building colonies without asking permission, and we took that as a declaration of war." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. 7 cycles of war, millions of deaths, and it had all started because of a misunderstanding. "We tried to communicate," she said. "We sent diplomatic missions." "Which we destroyed," Vexnar admitted. "Because we believed they were merely a cover for military operations. By the time we realized our mistake, it was too late. Too much blood had been spilled. Pride would not allow either side to back down." The truth of it hit Maria like a physical blow. All this death, all this suffering, and it had been built on a foundation of misunderstanding and pride. How many children had been orphaned because 2 species were too stubborn to talk to each other? "It doesn't have to continue," she said. "The war could end tomorrow if both sides wanted it to." "You are naive, Sergeant. Wars do not end simply because individuals want them to. There are governments, military structures, economic interests. The machinery of war has its own momentum." "Then change the momentum. You're a commander, you have influence, use it." Vexnar studied her with those 4 alien eyes. "And why should I? Why should I risk my career, my reputation, perhaps my life, to end a war that my people believe they are winning?" Maria leaned forward in her chair. "Because of those 47 children. Because every day this war continues, there are more orphans on both sides. More scared kids wandering through the rubble of their homes, wondering why the adults can't stop hurting each other. You want to know what humans would die for? We would die for the chance to save those kids. Would Dralians do the same?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Vexnar did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his desk and pulled out a small device, a holographic projector. When he activated it, the image of a young Dralian appeared. "My grandson," he said, "Krixnar. He was killed in the Battle of Proxima 4. He was only 15 cycles old." Maria felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." He wanted to be a musician, not a soldier. But the war required all available bodies, and so he was pressed into service. He died in his first engagement, cut down by human plasma fire. He never even had a chance to fight back. The image flickered and disappeared. Vexnar placed the projector back in his desk with reverent care. "I have hated humans for 3 cycles because of his death," the commander continued. "I have dedicated every resource at my disposal to winning this war, to making your species pay for what they took from me. But now," he shook his head slowly, "now I look at you, and I see a warrior who would die to protect Dralian children, and I wonder if perhaps Krixnar and the humans who killed him were both victims of the same madness." Maria didn't know what to say. She had been prepared for interrogation, for threats, for violence. She had not been prepared for this. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That is an excellent question." Vexnar pressed a button on his desk. A moment later, the door opened and Thraxel entered, along with several other officers. "I have made a decision," Vexnar announced. "The children rescued by the human soldiers will be returned to their families immediately. Sergeant Santos and her squad will be treated as honored guests, not prisoners." The officers exchanged surprised looks. "Commander," one of them began. "I am not finished. Additionally, I am requesting a meeting with the Human Alliance High Command. It is time to discuss the possibility of a ceasefire." The room erupted in objections. This was treason. This was weakness. The Emperor would never approve, but Vexnar raised one of his 4 hands and silence fell. "I have fought this war longer than any of you have been alive," he said. "I have killed more humans than I can count. And today, a human warrior taught me something that all my experience had failed to teach me, that courage is not only about fighting enemies. Sometimes the greatest courage is in protecting them." He turned to Maria. "Sergeant Santos, would you be willing to serve as a liaison in the peace negotiations? Your actions have demonstrated that humans and Dralians can find common ground. Perhaps that common ground can be built upon." Maria felt like she was dreaming. An hour ago, she had been prepared to die in a basement full of alien children. Now, she was being asked to help end a war that had killed millions. "I would be honored," she said. Down in the holding area, the members of Maria's squad were recovering from their ordeal. Private Chen sat against a wall, eating something that might have been food. The other soldiers were scattered around the room, talking quietly among themselves. When the door opened and Maria entered, followed by Commander Vexnar himself, they all scrambled to their feet. "At ease," Maria said. Then to her squad, "We've got new orders." She explained everything: the commander's decision, the planned peace negotiations, their new role as liaisons between the 2 species. By the time she finished, her squad members were staring at her with expressions of disbelief. "So let me get this straight," Chen said slowly. "We went from being dead men walking to being peace ambassadors, because we saved some alien kids. That's about the size of it." Chen laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Only humans. Only we would turn a suicide mission into a diplomatic breakthrough." "Is that a complaint?" "Hell no, Sergeant. I'm just saying this is going to make one hell of a story to tell the grandkids someday." Commander Vexnar watched the human soldiers with fascination. They were so different from Dralian warriors. Where his people were formal and disciplined, these humans were casual and irreverent. They laughed and joked with each other even in the most dire circumstances. It should have been irritating, but somehow it was endearing. Perhaps that was why they had been able to do what they did. Perhaps their capacity for informality allowed them to see beyond the boundaries of species and allegiance. Perhaps their humor helped them cope with situations that would break others. Whatever the reason, Vexnar found himself genuinely curious about these strange creatures. He had spent so long trying to defeat them that he had never taken the time to understand them. That he decided would change. The news of the ceasefire negotiations spread through both fleets like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some soldiers welcomed the possibility of peace, tired of the endless death and destruction. Others were angry, feeling that too much blood had been spilled to simply stop now. On the human side, Admiral Yuki Tanaka received the message from her Dralian counterpart with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She had been fighting this war for 5 cycles. She had lost friends, family, and half her fleet. The idea that it might end because some soldiers saved some children seemed almost too good to be true. But she agreed to the meeting. If there was even a chance of ending the war, she had to take it. The negotiations were scheduled to take place on a neutral station, a decommissioned trading post in the border region between human and Dralian space. Both sides sent delegations, and Maria was included in the human group at Commander Vexnar's personal request. She felt out of place among the admirals and diplomats. She was just a sergeant, a ground pounder who had never expected to do anything more significant than fight and possibly die for her people. But Vexnar had been insistent. The politicians will want to argue about territory and reparations, he had told her. They will want to win the peace as they could not win the war. But you, Sergeant, you represent something else. You represent the possibility that our two species can see each other as more than enemies. That is worth more than any territory. So here she was, sitting at a table with beings who held the fate of billions in their hands, wondering how a simple act of compassion had led her to this moment. The first day of negotiations was rough. Both sides had grievances, demands, accusations. Voices were raised. Threats were made. At one point, the human delegation nearly walked out after a particularly inflammatory comment from a Dralian senator. But Maria noticed something that gave her hope. Whenever the discussions became too heated, Commander Vexnar would bring up the children. He would remind the delegates that while they argued about borders and resources, there were orphans on both sides waiting for the killing to stop. It was a powerful rhetorical tool, and it worked. No one wanted to be seen as choosing war over children. On the third day of negotiations, a Dralian delegate asked to speak privately with Maria. She agreed, curious about what he wanted. His name was Threxler, and he was the senator representing the province where many of the orphaned children had come from. He was older even than Vexnar, with skin that had faded to pure white. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "My niece's child was among those you saved. When the Vega offensive happened, we feared the worst. To learn that she had been cared for by humans." He made a gesture Maria didn't recognize, but his tone conveyed deep emotion. "It changed something in me." "I'm glad she's safe," Maria said. "She is more than safe. She has become an advocate for peace. She tells everyone who will listen about the kind humans who fed her and played with her and sang her to sleep. She is only a child, but her voice carries weight. When she speaks, people listen." Maria smiled. "That's wonderful." "It is remarkable. One child, speaking of kindness she received, has done more to shift public opinion than all the speeches of all the politicians. I thought you should know that your actions had consequences beyond what you could see." The news warmed Maria's heart. She had hoped that saving those children might make a difference, but she had never imagined it would be this significant. When she returned to the human delegation, she shared what Threxler had told her. Admiral Tanaka listened with interest. "It seems we may have stumbled upon the most effective weapon in the galaxy," the admiral said dryly. "Kindness." Maria laughed. "It doesn't fit in a torpedo tube, sir." "No, but it might fit in a peace treaty." The negotiations continued for 3 more weeks. There were setbacks and breakthroughs. moments of despair and moments of hope. But gradually, slowly, the shape of a peace agreement began to emerge. The final treaty was signed on the anniversary of the Battle of Vega, a symbolic choice meant to honor all those who had died in the conflict. Representatives from both species gathered in the station's main hall to witness the historic moment. Maria stood at the back of the human delegation, still uncomfortable with her elevated status. But when the signing was complete and the room erupted in applause, she felt tears streaming down her face. It was over. 7 cycles of war, millions of deaths, and it was finally over. Commander Vexnar made his way through the crowd toward her. His ancient face bore an expression she had come to recognize as his version of a smile. "We did it, Sergeant." "You did it, Commander. I just saved some kids." "You did more than that. You reminded us all why we fight in the first place. Not for territory or resources, but for the future. For children who deserve a chance to grow up in peace." Maria looked around the room at humans and Dralians standing together, talking, even laughing. It was a sight she had never expected to see. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build something new, something better, and we make sure that no child, human or Dralian, ever has to fear again." 1 year after the treaty was signed, Maria Santos returned to Kepler 442b. The colony had been rebuilt, its scars slowly healing, but she wasn't there to see the reconstruction. She was there to visit a school. It was called the Unity Academy, and it was the first joint human-Dralian educational institution in the galaxy. Children from both species learned together, played together, grew together. The sight of human and Dralian kids running around the playground, laughing and shouting in a mixture of languages, was something Maria knew she would never forget. A young Dralian girl approached her, walking on 4 legs that had grown longer since Maria had last seen her. It was Sixa, the child who had been so scared and alone in that basement. "You came back," Sixa said. Her command of human language had improved dramatically. "I promised I would," Maria replied. "How are you doing?" "Good, I have friends now, human friends. They teach me things and I teach them things, it's nice." Maria knelt down to look Sixa in the eyes, all 4 of them. "I'm glad, I'm really glad." Sixa reached out with one of her 4 arms and touched Maria's face gently. "Thank you," she said, "for saving us, for not giving up." Maria felt her eyes stinging with tears. "I couldn't give up, not on you, not on any of you." Sixa smiled, a gesture she had learned from her human teachers. "That's what makes you different. That's what makes you human." The ceremony that afternoon was small but significant. Maria, along with the surviving members of her squad, was being awarded the first Unity Medal, a new honor created to recognize acts that promoted peace between species. Commander Vexnar, now serving as the Dralian ambassador to human space, presented the medals personally. As he pinned the medal on Maria's uniform, he spoke words that would be repeated across the galaxy. In the darkest moments of the war, when hope seemed lost, these human warriors chose compassion over fear. They protected the children of their enemies with the same devotion they would show to their own offspring. In doing so, they showed us all that the bonds of humanity extend far beyond species. They showed us that kindness is the greatest strength of all. Maria accepted the medal with humility. She knew that she hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had simply done what any decent person would do. She had protected children. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. In the years that followed, the story of the human warriors who protected enemy children became legendary. It was taught in schools on hundreds of worlds. It was used as an example in diplomatic training programs. It inspired countless acts of cross-species kindness and cooperation. The children who had been saved grew up and had children of their own. They told their offspring about the humans who had risked everything to keep them safe. And those children grew up believing that peace between species was not only possible but natural. The war became a distant memory, a cautionary tale about what happens when fear and pride override compassion and understanding. Humans and Dralians worked together, built together, dreamed together. They formed an alliance that would endure for centuries. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Maria Santos had demonstrated on that burning world so many years ago, that the instinct to protect children, all children, is the most human impulse of all. It was an impulse that could change the universe. Maria lived to see the 100th anniversary of the peace treaty. She was very old by then, her hair white, her body frail, but her eyes still held the same fire that had burned in them when she stood between Dralian children and danger. She spent her final years at the Unity Academy, teaching new generations of children about the importance of compassion. Humans and Dralians sat together in her classes, listening as she told stories about the war and the peace that followed. Her favorite story was always the same, the story of 47 children huddled in a basement, waiting for someone to save them, and the soldiers who had given everything to make sure they survived. When Maria died, she was mourned by millions. Humans and Dralians alike gathered to honor her memory. They planted trees in her name on 100 worlds. They named ships and schools and hospitals after her. They built statues and monuments and memorials. But the greatest tribute to her legacy was something simpler. It was the sight of human and Dralian children playing together, learning together, growing up together. It was the sound of their laughter, echoing across playgrounds and classrooms and homes. It was the future she had fought for, the future she had believed in even when all hope seemed lost. And it was beautiful. In the end, the story of the human warriors who protected enemy children was not really about war or peace. It was not about politics or diplomacy or military strategy. It was about something much more fundamental. It was about what it means to be human. It was about the recognition that every child, regardless of species, deserves to be loved and protected. It was about the courage to stand up for that principle, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was about the belief that kindness, freely given, can change the world. The humans who fought that war did not think of themselves as heroes. They thought of themselves as ordinary people doing what needed to be done. But history would remember them differently. History would remember them as the warriors who proved that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its tactics. It was its heart. And that heart, beating with compassion for all living things, would guide humanity to the stars and beyond. It would forge alliances that seemed impossible and heal wounds that seemed permanent. It would create a future where children of all species could grow up in peace, free from the fear and hatred that had once divided the galaxy. That was humanity's legacy. That was what it meant to be human. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, the children they had saved were passing that legacy on to their own offspring. They were telling stories about the strange, soft-skinned creatures who had risked everything to protect them. They were teaching their young that kindness has no boundaries, that compassion knows no species. They were making sure that humanity's greatest victory, the victory of love over fear, would never be forgotten. Humanity, with all its flaws and failings, had shown the galaxy something extraordinary. It had shown that even in the darkest times, even in the midst of the most brutal war, the light of compassion could still shine. And that light, once kindled, could illuminate the entire universe. This was not just a story about human warriors. It was a story about what all sentient beings could become if they chose love over hate, protection over destruction, hope over despair. It was a story that would echo through the ages, inspiring generation after generation to reach for something better. It was humanity's gift to the cosmos. And the cosmos, grateful and transformed, would never be the same.